This is my third attempt at a script for this video. The first attempt was too dry and matter-of-fact, and the second had too much fluff and detail. This is my third shot at this, and I really hope I don't have to do another one since I've already written almost 8,000 words about this game. So what is this enigma of a game that has defeated two of my other scripts? Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous. If that name means anything to you, then you might understand why this game has left me unable to nail down what to say about it. If you don't know what Pathfinder is, one look at the Steam reviews will give you an idea. The general consensus is that the game is great, but has a high barrier to entry. I read those reviews and took it as a challenge. 90 hours later, I'm finally done with my first playthrough. Yes, first, because there will likely be more. Pathfinder is like a drug you can't shake. If you haven't tried it, then it seems easy to stay away. Look at all these screens, look at all these numbers. Who in their right mind would even begin to try and understand this? Well, I'm not in my right mind, and never have been, so I took my first hit of Wrath of the Righteous, and haven't looked back. So we'll start where everyone starts, character creator. You might not believe it, but this is actually where you create a character. If you've seen the screen, you may find a keen, clean, glean, pristine, lean queen to dream... okay, enough. Listen, the character creator is obscene. Alright, that was the last one. It goes without saying that the character creation is quite in-depth, as is most mechanics residing within Wrath of the Righteous. You've got the classic bonk boys like fighters and barbarians, the thinker stinkers like wizards, sorcerers, witches, and alchemists, but then you got more specific options like the femur fiend necromancers or... Actually, I can't think of any more names. The point is that the limits of what kind of character you can make really comes down to your own creativity. But you might be thinking, surely some of those characters are so niche that their actual combat effectiveness suffers, right? And to that, I say, yeah. What do you think, I don't like being called Shirley? Anyways, yes, you'd be right. Some of the archetypes and classes are simply better than others. But to counteract this and the profound mental ineptitude of new players, Owlcat, the developers, added yet another screen to grace our eyes with. The difficulty screen. This thing has it all. Damage taken, stat reduction to enemies, rest cleansing, extra girth, extra length, better social skills towards the opposite sex. Well, only half of those are actually in, and the rest are possible additions I'd like to see in future updates. For the game, of course, any correlation to real-life wishes is purely coincidental. These settings are all very helpful in making the game more approachable, and can actually change the way the game plays drastically. Turn a few of these knobs and you'll find that the game plays more akin to its action RPG cousins rather than its contemporary CRPG peers. This is partly because Wrath contains both real-time and turn-based modes, which you can switch should you find yourself in a ditch. A single button shifts the game from one to the other, even during combat. Should the ruffians and goons get the upper hand on you in real time, switch to turn-based mode and take control of the action. If you find yourself stomping the opposition, switch to real time and let the dog pile begin. Having both modes freshens up the experience, gives you more control when you need it, and allows the trash fights to be more about the spectacle of your power rather than a time-wasting annoyance. This is one of my favorite features in Wrath of the Righteous, and it's one that I didn't know I needed until I had it. It has a flawless implementation to boot, so all you have to do is have your cake and eat it. If you've been reading, you'll likely notice the term D20, which, yes, means that this is an adaptation of a tabletop game. You know, one of those games where you sit down with other human beings, building social and teamworking skills. Couldn't be me. But that does mean that when you go to smack Reginald the Chaste with the humongous Dongus, Slayer of Virgins, there's a lot of math that happens to determine whether your attack penetrates Reginald's armor class. Fear not though, my ape-brain brethren, we possess the power of technology, so all that math stuff happens in the background, and we're left with either a satisfying hit or an excruciating miss. That's the basics. It's a lot of, is your number higher than the enemy's number? Does your attack add up to a number that's higher than your enemy's AC? Does your illusion spell roll higher than your enemy's will and fortitude saves? It all sounds eerily similar to another very popular RPG of recent release. Well, that's because it is. The foundation of both of these titles is the same, but where Baldur's Gate branches in the direction of simplicity, Pathfinder goes the opposite way, pushing for more intricacy and detail. Is one better than the other? It depends on who you are. For me, I like both systems. I find Baldur's Gate's D&D blood to be easier to digest, more relaxing, and with it having multiplayer, its simpler design sees me waiting 20 minutes for Nick to decide what he wants to build, rather than if Pathfinder had multiplayer where we'd be there for hours. But I'd be lying if I said Pathfinder's depth didn't please me on many levels though. Its complexity makes it rewarding to piece things together, and every time I started up the game to play, I was learning something new that made me understand the game better. It's a tough nut to crack, but it's a piñata of goodness once you finally breach the gates. It's got layers, just like that metaphor, and if you're willing to put the time in, you'll find a combat system that rewards that time with endless possibilities. But that's not all there is to Pathfinder. Oh no, we still got a lot to talk about. Let's tackle the other big thing next, Crusade Management. Crusade Management becomes a mechanic after the first act, and it's not quite as complicated as it first seems. Now you can adjust the difficulty of Crusade Management separate from the base game mechanics, which is nice, because as soon as I figured that out, I dropped it down to goo goo gaga baby mode. Look, I'm not going to tout that the management systems are bad, it's just not exceptionally interesting to me. I don't mind playing around with the systems, but I wasn't so invested that I felt like challenging myself. You can automate the whole management process of the game, but there's a lot of items and resources to be had doing it yourself. It was fun, don't get me wrong, I was enjoying the systems, but contrasted with the main combat and exploration, it just didn't quite hit the spot for me. It's a nice side activity, a distraction from the core gameplay which keeps things from feeling stale. There's two main parts to the management, which I'll call diplomacy and conquest. Diplomacy is where the riffraff of the Crusade needs some sorting, and so you're given decisions to make that will impact the army. Sometimes it's loot, sometimes it's procuring supplies, sometimes it's infighting. You'll be the deciding factor as to what happens, and this part I did find quite fun. Your army is shaped by your decisions, and your units will reflect that. Two different playthroughs can have vastly different armies with different units and bonuses. This is good, I like this. Conquest, on the other hand, I'm not as crazy about. You've got your units, they're organized into different armies, and then you can give them a general, which is basically a hero unit. Simple stuff. This concept is in a lot of different games. You use these armies to then explore the world and unlock locations that you can visit with your main party. This is also good. I also like this. The part that I do not like is the actual combat for your armies. And again, I'm not saying it's terrible, but compared with the other parts of the game, army combat just feels lackluster. It functions, and early on it can be quite engaging, trying out different unit combinations, finding the best general for the right kinds of armies. That kind of thing makes it fun for a bit. The problem is that the conquest combat falls apart pretty quickly. Once you find a single army that can wipe the floor with the opposition, you're kind of set. The experimentation is over, you win. Then you just repeat that 100 more times and you've cleared the map.
But Tiggle, you just said that you turned the conquest difficulty all the way down. Isn't that why the Crusade runs out of steam?
I don't think so. The difficulty options mostly affect how much money your Crusade gains and how many recruits you get. I enjoyed having infinite resources so I can try out everything and mess about without a care. The actual combat difficulty remains unchanged as far as I can tell. Am I just dumb? Don't answer that. Maybe I am, but I just don't think the Crusade combat held up to the standards set by the diplomacy and the main exploration of combat of the rest of the game. Again, I still had fun, but it lost its luster quickly and then still had a lot more left. What's the context for all this? What's the lore, the story? Well, I can say that the mechanical complexities of the character building and combat translate quite well to a highly in-depth story and world. A classic case of I don't know why I'm here, all I know is that I must kill. You've got your branching paths, your companions with all their personal baggage, your mythic paths. Oh, what's a mythic path? Oh, well, I'm very glad you asked. I really hope you asked. Mythic paths are a really interesting way the game ties both its story and gameplay together. It's basically another class that you're able to rank up, which you do through story progression and quests rather than your typical XP system. There are 10 of these bad boys, and let me tell you, they are bad. In a good way. They're good. But they're also bad. Like a good bad. Your mythic path is something that you'll get eventually, and depending on some of the choices you come across, you may have access to certain ones and not others. Some of them everyone gets, regardless of your actions up to that point. For others, you'll have to lean into a certain role in order to unlock them and head down that path. This is because they are a major part of the story, and because there's 10 of them, that means that there's 10 different stories that can be told here. Not to mention the choices within those stories, plus the choices within the base story. There's a lot. Too much for my peanut brain to understand, truthfully. And with this being a close to 100-hour game to play through to the end, of course you multiply that by 10 mythic paths and you get A lot. Consider the bush beaten, so how does this translate to actual gameplay? Well, these mythic paths aren't just for the story, they give you quite the power trip as well. These mythic paths are all unique, and I can't tell you about all of them because this video needs to be made, and I'm not about to spend hundreds upon hundreds more hours just so I can add another paragraph to this script. But I can tell you about the one I chose, and Google the rest, so there you go. The mythic powers are all about giving you some sort of power that other enemies and companions can't get. There's one that gives you a dragon companion that does something. I didn't pick that one. The demon path gives you the ability to turn into various demons. I didn't pick that one either. The angel path gives you extra healing and team support abilities. And again, I did not choose that one. The trickster lets you bend the rules of certain gameplay mechanics. Okay, yeah, that one I did actually pick. So for example, you can pick up a perk that allows you to immediately use the demoralize ability as soon as combat starts. Pretty handy, getting a free debuff on enemies right away. Then you can upgrade it to allow the same demoralize to stun enemies. Okay, that's even better. Disabling your opponents sounds pretty great. But wait, you can upgrade it again to tier 3, where if your enemies get demoralized, they simply kill themselves. So you could walk into a combat scenario, and as soon as it starts, your mere presence alone causes the enemies to get so depressed that they, well, let's just say they won't be an issue anymore. But I just pranked you again, because I didn't take that skill. Instead, I went with the stealth upgrade, since I was all about my rapier and stealth attacks. I was able to become permanently invisible, attack from said invisibility, and become harder to affect with spells, effectively making me immune to most crowd control effects. So you've got an in-depth story, lots of exposition, and then a mythic story that kind of starts out as a side gig, only to become integral to everything that goes on. It's a lot, and honestly, it's too much. I think there's something to be said for starting up and just going. There's not a lengthy prologue, not a lot of cutscenes, there's just not a lot of roadblocks in the way of getting to the core of the game. You start it up and within 5 to 10 minutes you're in control of your character, fighting monsters. For replay value, this is huge. It makes you want to replay the game because you know you can immediately start playing. There's no, oh well, the first hour of the game is a snore fest. If you go at a brisk pace, as you likely will on a repeat playthrough, you could be in the first dungeon within 20 minutes or so. For a game that has so many options, breaking down these barriers to the core of the game is a big deal, and it's something that I really appreciate since, yeah, I do want to replay the game again. I want to try a different class, I want to follow a different mythic path, I even want to go through the same mythic path with the charisma character in order to do the demoralize thing. So let's wrap this discussion up. Is Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous any good? Yes, it's quite good, but it's certainly not for everyone. There's a lot that goes into playing this game, and I wouldn't say it's a very relaxing game. It got better as I started to understand the systems more, but comparing it to other CRPGs, it's really complex. That complexity comes with a lot of fun, but you need to be willing to read, and read carefully what the game says. There are some sinister combinations you can pull off with items, skills, and abilities, but the game isn't going to hand them to you. You need to piece it together yourself, and certain interactions require you to understand certain systems quite well in order to make the most out of them. It doesn't have the production quality that other titles have. Not every character has a portrait showing you what they look like, and the voice acting is scarce, which can make the story harder to follow, with many of the names being thrown around not exactly being Josh and Mary. I didn't even know how to pronounce the city that the 4th chapter takes place in until after the 4th chapter. Alushanira isn't exactly something that rolls off the tongue. The companions can be kinda hit or miss, most are one note, but overall they serve their purpose well enough to be the Scooby gang that follows you around. So if you're thinking about getting into Wrath of the Righteous, I would say give it a go. It's not quite as complicated as the character creator would have you think. Once you actually get into the game, it does a decent job of not overwhelming you too much right away. You don't pick up the mythic ranks until the end of Act 1, and even then, you don't get to make a decision on the type of path you take until rank 3. Similarly, you don't get access to the conquest part of the game until the end of Act 1, but don't engage with the diplomacy until Act 3. Things are paced out in a way that make it more approachable, and its long runtime gives you plenty of time to come to grips with the systems, along with the difficulty settings giving you enough control so that you can customize the experience to be as hardcore or lenient as you'd like. I really enjoyed Pathfinder, more than I thought I would actually. It was collecting dust in my library as an RPG I would get around to eventually. I'm glad I finally bit the bullet and gave it a shot. It's one of the deepest and most expansive games I've ever played, and while it's not for everyone, it's certainly for me in a lot of ways. It's given me a new appreciation for games of this level of complexity, and learning it has given me more confidence in my problem-solving abilities. It was fun to learn most of this stuff on my own, with a bit of googling here and there once I really started getting into it. If you're new to CRPGs, I probably wouldn't start with Pathfinder. There are other games that are much easier to learn that can kinda ease you into this style of game. But if you're familiar with a wider range of RPG mechanics from different games, both D20 styles and others, you may want to consider Pathfinder. It demands a fair bit from the player, but it also gives back tenfold with one of the most customizable and replayable experiences out there. What Wrath of the Righteous does well, it does unconquerably well. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. It really does help out. Let's talk about Pathfinder down in the comments. It's been a fresh and exciting experience for me as a beginner, but what about you all? Any veterans out there, beginners, folks daunted by the prospect of challenging this game? Let me know. Until next time. Oh look, it's a nincompoop.